So all this while, we've been hearing amazing women and great organizations talk about what it takes to be in sales and what the organizations are doing to, bring more and more and attract more and more women into the function. And however, sales really is a career of choice amongst young girls. The studies say that women do exceptionally in sales, but it's not, the numbers don't say the same story. And our next segment is about busting some of those myths when we have some senior business and HR leaders speak about their experiences. And we'll have a very dynamic Mehnaz Sheikh. Can we have Mehnaz on screen, please? Hello, Mehnaz, and welcome to WinS.
Thank you so much, Purva. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mehnaz is head HR at Uran, the foods and FMCG segment, and she's a well-rounded human resource leader with core value of passion, ownership, courage, and she has got a strong FMCG experience of 18 years in diverse roles across business partnering and HR expertise. Over to you, Mehnaz. We are looking forward to this session. You can introduce the panelist and carry on with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Purva. Firstly, it's been a very, very engaging day. I think some very real and authentic conversations. We hope to continue that in our panel too, which is called She Wants to Know. I think the intent of this panel is to truly represent the voice of the woman, both women who are exploring sales careers and women who are already in sales careers. So I would really, really request all of you who've joined this to jot in your questions. Any question goes. So please jot in your question in the chat window and we'll try and address some of them. I will start introducing the panel. I will begin with Abhay. Abhay has spent about 22 years experience across various sectors in telecom, government, BFSI, IT sales. He's the current India sales head and scale customer business lead for APAC from LinkedIn. Very happy to have you, Abhay, with us. We then have Raj Rishi. He's the chief business officer at Make My Trip. He's had tremendous experience both in e-com, but most importantly also FMCG, almost a decade-long experience in PepsiCo, along with certain conglomerates like Samsung and GE Money. Rishi, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Mehnaz.
Thank you. I then will like to request Ruchita Taneja to come on. She's the Director, New Business Sales and One Acquisitions Country Lead for Google. She's trying to do something very interesting, which is digitize India. Also an independent director in India One Payments, which is the largest white label ATM company, which is trying to take banking technology to semi-urban and rural India. Welcome, Ruchita, to the panel.
Hi, Mehnaz. Thank you.
Last but definitely not the least, my HR friend and partner, Pavitra Singh, who's the CHRO for PepsiCo. Pavitra is a great HR professional with well-rounded experience across various aspects of HR. And she will represent the orchestrator's view definitely on the panel. So looking forward to an interesting discussion, Pavitra.
Thanks, Mehnaz. Looking forward.
So thank you so much. We truly have a diverse panel. We're going beyond gender here. We have sectoral experiences. We have very interesting career trajectories that some of our panelists represent. And I hope to tap into that, requesting all of you to also tap into those experiences as you send us your questions. I will actually begin with the first question. It's very interesting to hear some of the discussions that we've had during the day. I think many of you represent different sectors and different types of sales, not only different types of sales, but also evolving sales, given both the external context and some of the government regulations. So my request would be, could you briefly describe what is sales in your current organization? Because that will help expand the view of what sales truly looks like. Abhay, let me begin with you.
Thanks, Mehnaz, and thank you for having us on this panel. I think before I just jump into the conversation around what is sales like within my organization at this point in time, I think sales has also evolved over the last 20, 23 years that I've been seeing. When I started off in my sales career, I remember walking up to the topmost floor of a building and walking down at each and every office and trying to knock the door to find out anybody who was relevant for me to have a chat with. That was when I started off. I think over a period of time, our customers have become more evolved, and so has the sales process being more evolved. Today, within LinkedIn, it's a very hybrid kind of a model. I think our customers are very well aware because of the digitization that has happened across the board. Nearly everyone is aware of what they wanted to buy, what they want to sell. So being on the top of the game is the most important skill that you would need to be, which means that you need to research a lot about your customers. You need to understand what is it that you're adding as value, how are you being differentiated, and sales is pretty much a hybrid function today. We have people wanting to go into a virtual meeting just like this. We have people who wanting to be and very open to meeting face to face. It has nuances when you talk about the demographic of people that you have in the organization. If you think about people from Gen Zs, they would pretty much talk about this meeting becoming a face-to-face meeting as well, because a Zoom meeting is also like a face-to-face meeting, versus somebody who's a millennial or a baby boomer who would definitely want to be in the front and center of where the action is. So I think sales and the way buyers are buying right now is evolving, but pretty much a hybrid model where you can work from anywhere in the country and still do your job as you're required to do.
Thanks, Abhay. Rishi, request you to perhaps highlight e-com sales, especially what Make My Trip would have gone through in COVID.
Sure. So Mehnaz, like this is an interesting career move for me as well, because I come from a company where sales was a very well-defined function, and that's what I did for most of my life there, where sales is an org, very well-defined. In the e-com space, actually, sales is a very it's confusing because we have multiple businesses, and so we have a B2B business, we have a B2C business. The B2B business is actually more well understood. It's the typical business development, and hence that's what people generally relate to as sales. But the B2C e-commerce business is quite a complicated piece, because you do not really directly sell, or I mean your platform needs to sell. So we broadly define this function as revenue, and it's quite complicated because it's making your inventory available in the platform and then selling it at a cost. So not as clean and clear as a regular sales definition that people generally understand. So it's a complex beast we call revenue, and has multiple smaller facets to it. But then we have something called business development at the supply side. I mean, most e-com platforms like Amazon or Make My Trip or Flipkart, they would have a business development team which basically builds supply, which is very similar to what sales in an FMCG environment is.
Thanks, Rishi. It's interesting, the contrast of B2B to B2C. I'd still like to perhaps stay in that sector. Ruchita, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear both Abhay and Rishi and their experience. And I, based on the last 20 years of me being in and around sales and across different organization and sales type, I can share a couple of thoughts, right? So when you're looking at B2B type of sales, right, which is, let's say, what I did at Citi or what we're trying to do at Google, I think what I've seen the evolution in the sales function is, it is catering to the level of awareness of the consumer. So, when it's a product or an area where everyone is, new to that product, then oftentimes sales becomes about product selling. But when your consumer becomes more aware and more mature and more sophisticating in their buying process or even the application process, then the selling process has become more solution oriented, which is really where, as a seller or as a sales function, you're supposed to know your product very well, but you're also supposed to know your customer's business very well and the environment that they are operating in and what their big rocks are as to what is their strategy or vision or objectives that they're trying to solve for. And then how do you make your product features apply for their use case? So, there's a lot of solutioning, and that's the skill set that I've seen sales kind of now play more sales roles in B2B, companies across industries, and now on the solution selling piece, not really just a pure, off the shelf product selling piece. And I think that's the evolution of the last 20 years that I've seen. When I look at some of the work that I did on the B2C side, and I think that's a little bit of what Raj was saying, there it's a little bit about how do you gain, you can't do that bespoke solutioning, right? You're trying to get virality, or you're trying to get that, network effect when you're trying to sell to a wider mass audience. And there it's really about how can you make the product features very, very simplified? And how do you kind of put the communication out there so that, there is more and more ease of discovery and ease of adoption. So, then the sales function kind of takes a lot more of a product hat, if I can call it that, and communication hat. That how do you put out your message a lot more, and how do you incentivize people for adoption? So sales can have very different role definitions depending on the space that you are in and depending on the consumer that you're trying to sell to. And it really emanates from understanding what your consumer wants and what is it that you're trying to offer to them.
Interesting. So clearly evolving consumer needs, both in terms of their own awareness of the product and the fact that now it's not just direct selling, which I will come to Pavitra to talk about, but also via a platform. Pavitra, how has FMCG sales evolved? Something that a lot of us, at least on this panel, have experience of.
Yeah, no, very interesting to hear the conversation. And, like Rishi alluded, that sales is pretty much structured, right, in our world, okay, because sales is really the bread and butter, both sales and manufacturing, right? And for us, it's been pretty much structured for years now. In fact, every person who joins us in this organization must go for a route ride, for example, because you must be in the market. You must know how selling happens, right? If you look at our management training program, the first 9 months is literally about, and irrespective of whichever function you join, you have to be in the market. You have to go and do the beat or the route, right? You must know what the 8 steps of selling is. And I know, Rishi, you can relate to this, right? Because you spend so much of time in this function. So it is pretty much that, right? And if you look at the sales function, as I said, bread and butter, core to our organization and what we do. And again, sales has different aspects to it. There is traditional trade, which is really about being out there in the market, getting new customers, right? Working with the distributors, okay, working with retail, right? And selling our products to them. Then there is obviously organized trade, okay, and that's where you have modern trade, e-com, right, which is really about selling, through these e-com platforms or big channels. So really, sales has different avatars to it, but it's about managing that relationship, okay, with your consumer, with your customer. And therefore different roles. So at one end, you have customer executives, you have area sales manager roles, which is hardcore where you're working in the market. You have to work the market, work with your distributors, you're out there. And then, of course, you have the other headquarter roles, right, which is working through different channel partners. So interesting mix. And therefore, that also kind of gives a variety to the portfolio of roles that we have in our organization. And we often see people moving and shifting, right, from traditional trade roles, giving a different flavor to organized modern trade e-com roles. And yes, I think, sales has evolved. I think post the pandemic, we've also realized we have experimented with different models. Okay. So direct to consumer, for example, is one of the big changes that we have seen. So I think you will relate to that at Uran yourself, right? So I think leveraging different platforms, different ways, has been clearly, direct to consumer is one of the biggest pieces that we've been experimenting with.
Thanks, Pavitra. I think FMCG sales almost has been grounding, a lot of leaders across segments, across sectors. I think the predictability and the sameness has remained the same. But you're right, evolution of e-commerce, institutional sales, modern trade, this has all happened in the last few years versus the traditional Kirana sales. Thank you so much. I think it's interesting. We've gotten just a brief overview of the entire spectrum, right, from product selling, B2B to B2C sales. Let me start with perhaps the question that's connected to this. There are a lot of myths, some true, some perhaps not true, because organizations are trying to do a lot to remove some of these institutional barriers. of women in sales. In your mind, what's the biggest barrier that you have encountered in your organization to get more women into sales? So the biggest barrier that you believe you're trying to overcome as an organization or even as a leader to get more women in sales. Perhaps Ruchita will start with you.
I think the biggest barrier that I faced every time I've gone out to hire women is kind of reaching out to the right talent. And I think there is information asymmetry that exists there. I think there are extremely talented women who can do wonders in sales. I fundamentally come from the school of thought where I think that inherently women make better sellers. And they make better sales leaders because of just the balance of IQ and EQ and the strength of building relationships and being able to build that authenticity with your customers, which I think just just that empathy to understand your customers. So I actually come from the school of thought where I think women make very, very strong sellers. And the challenge that I have always found is the pipeline or the slate that comes up whenever I go out in the market to hire, right? I think the pipeline or the slate that comes up often is not gender balanced. And I think as a leader, one thing that one has to always do is just keep insisting on that gender balance in the pipeline. Of course, after that, it has to be the merit and the candidature that has to win the thing. But I think it really starts from there. And the reason why I think the supply asymmetry is there, because I think maybe because we as recruiters, we are not reaching out to the right talent, or the right talent is not reaching out to the right brands. So I don't think it's a paucity of talent. I just think that the two, demand and supply, exist. It's just that somebody needs to make that intentional effort to make the two meet, and that's been the biggest roadblock. And there are multiple things that we try and do in our organization. One is, like I said, whenever I've gone out and hired, I've always aimed for an end objective of having a completely balanced, gender balanced, or as we call it, the URG balance, underrepresented groups, because for us diversity is gender, but it's also many more elements of it. So we try and always make sure that our pipeline is equally balanced. And you don't stop till you get to that. So you keep interviewing, you don't close the process, and oftentimes it does mean that the process is running longer. And you just as a leader have to be comfortable with that if you are aiming for an end objective of a balanced team, like for example today I have a 50% URG balanced team, and that has come with a lot of patience on time and a lot of continuous looking around, I think. But some of the other things that we've learned at our organization, which we do now, is that we're constantly in the market talking to women talent with or without sales background, because it doesn't, for you to make a successful career in sales doesn't mean that you have to come from sales. So, we are very open to looking at diversity of experience. We're always open to looking at diversity of personality types, because again, there's this misnomer that exists in the market that you have to be a type of personality. I don't think that's true. In my experience, I've worked with all personality types, and I have found very successful sales leaders who are not the type A personality, right? So you just have to keep looking. So I think one thing that we always do, whether or not we're in the market to hire, we're constantly reaching out and talking to good candidates. The second thing that we've been doing is actually we've also been investing in a kind of like a mid-career training program. We call it the DigiPivot program, where we run this once a year, or we're now trying to ramp it up to twice a year. But it's really a very bullet size, or a bite-sized thing for 2 to 3 months, where we actually recruit select women. We make them go through a leadership, self-development, digital marketing curriculum, and then that ends up being one of the pipeline for us as well. So yeah, but in my experience, the biggest barrier has been finding the right talent.
It's interesting, Ruchita, you made quite a few interesting points, some that I'll actually pick up in questions that are coming up ahead. But I don't want to do the gender play here, since this is a perfectly balanced panel of who's a better sales leader. But I think you made a very important point on lack of availability of slate. congrats to you on a perfectly balanced team. I can completely understand when you as a business leader said it means that I need to do more work and I need to wait longer for my position to get filled. And therefore, this kind of personal advocacy, I think, is more important than just what organizations expect as goals. Pavitra, I'm going to bring you in on this question because FMCG sales has a very, very typical perception of what it entails, both the good and the many bads, to be honest, that we've tried to overcome. What in your mind has been the biggest barrier to getting more women in sales, despite the history that we've had with campuses and many, many leaders growing out of sales positions?
No, I think a couple of things, right? I think the first thing that we faced, a couple of years ago was mindset, right? I think we had to really work on the mindset of the managers, okay? Because if you don't have the right mindset, because you would have managers coming and saying that, okay, let's not hire a female because she will not be able to work with the distributor, will not be able to work with the retailer, right? And I think those were really hardcore, deep-rooted mindset. So we really had to do a lot of work in terms of really shifting that mindset, right? And I personally believe that sometimes you have to create that push to get that pull. Yeah. So just a small example, in one of our territories, in one of the units, we said, okay, let's get 100%, women sales trainees. Okay. There was a huge pushback, right? Because everybody came back and said, no, we can't do it. Our business is going to tank and everything, right? But we said, no, let's pilot, let's try, right? And after 6 months, it was the same set of managers who came back and said, you know what, this is the best decision ever. Because absolutely to what Ruchita said, again, I don't want to be, swaying on the other side. But the fact is that women are better at relationship, right? I think the kind of the balance that you spoke about, EQ and IQ, right? The language, the discipline, all that changed, right? And there was far more productivity, okay? So I think, sometimes, as I said, you have to make that push to, have people realize and acknowledge that, yes, I think this is the right way. So I think mindset was one of the big things that we had to work. But I think on the other side, what we really had to work was also around the infrastructure, right? Because if I'm expecting to get more and more women in these frontline roles, and the 8 hours they are working in the market, which means they're walking the streets where there's possibly no washroom, right? So how do we make sure that we create that kind of environment ecosystem where they feel comfortable, right? So it's not just about physical enablers like creating a washroom literally at distributor points, right? But it's about simple things. Who will manage the washroom? Who's going to, make sure that the washroom is clean? And there are a lot of other things, right, that get associated with it. Then there's safety, right? In markets like Uttar Pradesh and, and in some of these, this thing, how do we make sure that, our women are safe, right? It's actually gender agnostic. Both men and women need to be safe. But then you need to kind of make sure that some of these hotspots, are we making sure that, we're not really posting women there, right? So I think making sure that the work environment, is lucrative, is safe, is comfortable for our women, and making sure that they get platforms to voice. Because, in fact, we heard this from some of our management trainee females, right, who never voiced it, saying that, because we didn't have a washroom, we started getting health issues, right, because you were controlling. So how do we make sure that we give platforms to women to voice, right? And then start taking actions. So there was a lot of these challenges, Mehnaz, that we faced. And I think it was one by one, looking at basic foundation, let's, attack that. And then moving to higher order things like, okay, dual careers, how do we make sure that we help people with dual careers? Or how do we make sure that we give them career paths? Because people go through life stages, women get married, and then, they don't want to work into traditional trade roles, right? So how do we make sure that we give them different opportunities? So yeah, it's been a journey for us, working through the basic foundation and then moving up.
Perfect, Pavitra. I think you touched upon some very important brass tacks that I think right from infrastructure to even organizational and leader mindset to trying some of these things. At this point in time where I'm actually going to do a poll with the audience that we have like a mix of people who've joined us from campuses, women from campuses who are exploring sales careers and women who are already in sales careers. A poll as to what do they see as the biggest barrier to actually having a fulfilling career in sales. Hema, I would request you to bring up that poll while I move on to the next question. We actually have an interesting question from one of the audience members. And this I will address to Rishi and Abhay. This is around how do you sway quote unquote, or that's the question that's come in. How do you sway or encourage more women to actually have a career in sales? And this is an important question because Ruchita talked about the slate and the lack of it. So Rishi, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Uh, so, so the first thing is that sales is an experience that you need to have. Of people who are in campuses or early in their career, if you intend to be CEOs or manage P&L someday, I genuinely think that you can't do it without having first-hand experience on selling, because that's the core underlying process of generating revenue for the company. And if you haven't done it yourself, and you have not led the team that does that for you, you will struggle managing the P&L because you'll not understand the core capacity to generate revenue. So I think that's extremely important for you to understand. So the thing is that, sorry, Pavitra, I'm going to pick up a few points that you said. See, there is difficulty in sales. Specifically, there is difficulty in sales in India for frontline. Because I've managed teams, so I know that the environment outside when you actually sell in the street is hostile. And hostile doesn't mean that places are unsafe. It's just that Pavitra, one of the things that we work the most in Pepsi is to create hygiene for female sales people at distributor points. So, but those problems exist when you are in the marketplace for 8 hours. There's genuine problem. And some of these physical obstacles, the physicality of the selling process at times dissuades females early on, actually dissuades males as well. I never wanted to do sales myself. I thought, who will walk the street 8 hours? So the physicality of the process can look daunting, but I think you will learn the most out of this nature of the beast where you interact with people. That's the single most, when I look back it feels sad to say 20 years, but yeah, my 20 years of work life, what I've learned most is is while making sales calls. So I think don't think about the physicality of the job. The learning curve is immense, and definitely we want more and more women leaders in business, not just sales leaders, women leaders in business. And for that, you'll have to go through this process of learning sales. So I think that should be the single largest motivator, that as you think about your future, as you think about doing large roles, you need to know the underlying process of selling. That's number one. The second thing is, I think most organizations, for myself, we've heard Ruchita speak, and I'm sure Abhi will say the same thing, that organizations are becoming extremely sensitive that women employees need some more facilities, space, time, relaxation. So, and later on, when women do get married, no matter what we say, like a woman's life is far more difficult because it's again sad, but traditionally in an economy, the woman has a bigger role to play at home as well versus the male, even if both are earning. So I think companies have started to realize it and have started to build flexibility in the way they work, and giving some more facilities to women, and that's across industries, across companies. So life is slightly easier than what it would be 10 years back. So I think that's the second thing, that most companies have some compassion, some understanding that things need to be a little different. So that's number two. And finally, even like if you see from a company's point of view, it's not that companies are NGOs. The thing is not to make life easier for someone, but the fact is we want 50% of our talent to equally participate in the most important part of our business, which is revenue generation, right? So we can't have an economy where it's dissymmetrically asymmetric and only 50% of our population over indexes there. So companies desperately want to build supply, give good careers, and take care as well. So I think for all these reasons, you should strongly think about doing sales, not just early on, but do multiple stints in sale, do multiple types of sales, because those skills are extremely important as you become women CEOs.
Actually, Rishi, you touched upon my favorite and my personal strong belief. Do sales if you want to be the CEO or you want to do PNL. Because that's when you become that, you know what the grind is, you know what the reality on the ground looks like. So completely agree with you. Abhay, your point of view.
I have a very simple answer to that. I think 99% of the world population sells at some point in time or the other. I think it's a life skill. Whether you're selling and making money out of it is a choice that you need to make, because you're going to be selling irrespective of whatever job that you do. And as a lot of people have touched upon here, I think everybody chooses a path in their career. Uh, the path that is the most difficult, sales, as most of us have touched upon, is not an easy job to do, whether it's in a personal capacity or in the professional capacity. But when you grow in your career, I think the biggest learnings that you get is when you have failures, when you go through a path which is difficult. And sales is something that gives you a good balance between a good side of life as well as the difficult situations that you need to go through, and build that resilience. And I think that is something which a lot of folks in India, and especially when you're growing up and you're just thinking about a career, you need to think about certain skills that you would need to develop. Curiosity, if you have curiosity, if you have the ability to be resilient about learning from failures, if you want to have a successful life in the future, be financially independent. If you're doing well, you automatically do good for yourself. But you do good for your society, you can do good for your family. There's so many pluses that come along with it, that it just outweighs anything that stands in the way for you to not think about a career in sales. And I think sales also is not just about selling, right? I think the best sellers that you would see are not the ones that are selling. The best sellers are the ones that are maintaining relationships, as I think I think Ruchita pointed out, right? So if you're building relationships over a period of time, this is something that you would do in your personal life. So it's a life skill. You would practice this and make money out of it if you get into sales professional. Otherwise, you'll do it anyhow, free of cost, for somebody else.
That's an interesting point, Abhay. I think Ruchita touched upon two aspects, actually: understanding the customer and the problem that you're solving for, and definitely, obviously, hence building relationships.
Menaz, if you don't mind, I'd just like to come in with one additional point. So one, I echo everything that Abhay and Raj are saying.
Yes.
I just want to actually borrow something that Pavitra had said about the mindset. I think what can sway to get more women in sales is also for women to work on their own mindset. I think, there's a lot of work that organizations are doing in changing the mindset of leaderships. There's a lot more sponsorship and commitment. I think for women, one of the things that I have often faced and, is perhaps the hesitance about pushing themselves out of their comfort zone to step into a sales role. So I think, or even just have the ambition that I want to be a CEO. Right. So I think the one thing that I would want to say is that will really sway this is for women to say that I do want to be a CEO. And if one of the critical skills and experiences that I need to gain is sales, then I will get into it and I will give it my best and take the difficult part of it with the positives of sales. I think that mindset is an important thing that will move the needle as well.
Ruchita, perfect. I think if I had to use a hashtag, since we're talking and appealing to a generation which understands it better than a long form communication, I think it would be dare to dream big. You're absolutely right. And connected to that, one of the things that we wanted to do in this panel was actually get a sense check of all the people who joined us and are listening to us. What do they see, the poll that I was referring to, what do they see as the barrier to actually, taking on a sales career? And we gave them the following options. We said, what dissuades you? Is it the pressure of targets? Is it long hours? Is it travel? Is it infrastructure and logistics, to what Pavitra was referring to? Is it just mismatch of skills, a certain perception that there is a certain sales type? Or is it lastly nature of job, to slightly leave it open-ended? Guess what the highest dissuader was? This is actually interesting for me. It's an insight. I did not think this would be the answer. The answer is 62% of people felt it was the pressure of targets, followed by long hours, which was 19%. All the other reason was single digit percentage and hence less important, but pressure of targets. And I'd like, Ruchita, for you to weigh in on that a bit. Expectations and targets or goals and accountabilities in every job that you do, but somehow one feels obviously in a sales job, it's daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly. What has been your experience of actually doing that day in, day out?
So the pressure of targets,
and why do you still find it fulfilling actually?
Yeah. So see, pressure of targets is something that is equally felt irrespective of your gender. I think it's just the approach with which you look at that pressure. I think that is the difference. The second thing that I would say, because now I've been leading sales teams for many years, and this is a conversation that often comes up, especially in a bad quarter or a bad month. I think the one thing that I would say is to look at it like stock market investments or mutual fund investments. I think the way, and I'm hoping some of them are already exposed to the concept of systematic investment planning, which is just keep putting in some money every month. It will hopefully pay off over a period of time. So be in it for the long run. So I think pressure of targets or sales is the same thing. And this is what I keep telling my team, whenever they come up to me and say that, oh my God, we may not meet the targets. What are we going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I basically tell them that, listen, break it down into a science of what your input rigor needs to be. And as long as you're continuously coming and doing that input rigor, there could be a run up to, before it starts paying out and, showing up in targets being met. But if you've invested in doing your rigor, if you've invested in building relationships, if you've invested in understanding the customer needs, if you've invested in putting yourselves in the shoes of the customer and anticipating their needs, like Steve Jobs said, right, that customers oftentimes know what they want, but oftentimes they don't know what they want. So are you that trusted advisor? Are you putting yourself in the shoes of that CEO that you may be selling to, or the consumer that you may be selling to, and kind of acting as their advisor? If you're doing all of those, small actions, but very meaningful actions on a regular basis, targets is then something that's a byproduct. I think they will happen. And if you're doing it right, you're being consistent in it, you're doing it with the right objective, and you're doing it with the skill and the will, then targets can come and go. It's okay. The world will not end if you don't meet your targets, is really the way I at least tell my team. And I said, as long as you're focusing on the input, that's your controllable. Output is not your controllable. And so what if you miss a target in a month? It's okay. It's fine. You can still go out and party that the month end is over, and I have worked hard enough. So that's at least been my advice to the sales teams that I've led. So I think it's just about perhaps in, again, the mindset, just embrace that pressure and make it more normal. It is not a situation of life and death. Most of the sales that we all do is not a matter of life and death. We are not at the border fighting. We are not a doctor trying to save a life. We are not, most of us, right? I know it may not apply to all industries. So it's okay to miss a target if that's what you want. Focus on what is in your control and do a damn good job of it.
I think that's a good mantra. Your rigor and quality of input will drive your output. I think it'll apply to many of our New Year resolutions also. I think personally for me, having been and partnered sales teams so closely at a certain point in life, I think I wanted to do sales. I actually love the quantifiable nature of it. And I love the fact that you're doing it with a large team. There's just a different high when you're doing it with a large team. But Rishi, want to bring you in here. You've been doing it for many years now across different sectors, and I'm afraid to know what your target expectations are in Make My Trip versus PepsiCo. So how has the journey been for you here?
See, the good thing is that that unlike many other jobs, see, ultimately if we are awake for maybe 14 hours a day, we spend 8 hours at work, 8 plus hours at work. So it's very important that we feel happy at work. Now, sales is perhaps the only function where your goals are so quantified that when you cross them, you really feel fulfilled. I mean, Menas, Pavitra, see, like for example, you guys do HR. Now, no matter how hard you work, it's not very quantified. You can't really quantify that, okay, I broke my HR target by 10%, right? I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, but for sales, you have a goalpost in mind. I mean, just the high of crossing that goalpost every single time, or at least trying to cross that goalpost every single time. Not that it can be a monthly cycle, it can be quarterly cycle. For example, for Make My Trip, we work on an hourly cycle. If we lose traffic an hour, we've almost it's very difficult to recover. But the thing is, the high of these small things finally making you feel and your entire team feeling proud of what you have achieved over a month or a quarter. I mean, there isn't a high like that. Like I've done marketing. I mean, you do. I mean, you keep on slogging. You don't really know what have you done in the short term. So sales is in that way the only quantified function in the company, and just the and most of the organization champions around the sales unit. I mean, ultimately, no matter what you do in marketing, what you do in HR, what you do in finance, if the sales team does not go ahead and win the mile, you've not actually crossed anything. So we are the front line. Secondly, secondly, there is stress. Obviously, there is stress, but I think mostly it's good stress. I mean, what Ruchita mentioned, that inputs matter, and in most of the organizations actually do not judge you on the outcome. Outcome can change if it's a long winter in Pepsi, you can't help it. I mean, you can't sell the beverage. Most of the companies actually account you for inputs. That did you input well? Because output is dependent upon multiple other things. So there is actually that fear कि मुझे 1,000 crore करना is not there. I have to do these 10 things right in a disciplined manner every single day for that 1,000 crore to happen. And that's how companies judge you. Like we don't, in Make My Trip, there is no way to judge outcome. If COVID happens, so be it. I mean, we can't help it. But what we do need to do is we do need to put the rigor of every single day. So I think do not worry on the outcome or this perception that sales is that target. I'm a soft guy myself, yeah, and I manage revenue. So it's not that कोई monster बैठा हुआ जो रोज फोन करके बोल रहा है कि आज कितने नंबर किए. That's not reality. That's mostly movies. So it's not as like there is stress, but I genuinely think it's good stress. And third, and just like one more selling point for you to think about sales, that just like in the army where the infantry gets the fastest career moves, in an organization generally a salesperson progresses way faster because of the same reasons that it's outcome driven, it's not judgmental, there's no perception, you actually do things and those things result in something. So it's far more quantifiable and hence the movements are faster. And finally, I mean, what Ruchita also said, this thing on pressure actually is gender neutral. I mean, the same pressure haunts everyone. I mean, that it's gender neutral. Yeah.
Rishi, I don't think Mocambo is sitting on your head. I would love to know how many of your teams are receiving calls from you every 2 hours. So that poll we'll keep for later for a different team. Pavitra, coming to you, and I think you mentioned this before, and one of my realizations has been that I think many organizations have become fairly gender sensitive, are using it as a strategy, hence hiring में कोई fight नहीं है. काफी सारे लोग आ रहे हैं, percentages are almost in the 30%, 30 to 40% land, people are figuring out different sources to hire. For me, I think the inflection point is middle management and top management. That's where the entire so-called beautiful house breaks down, right? So Pavitra, can you share what in your mind are some specific things that you have seen work to get women to critical roles and help them progress thereafter?
Yeah. I think there is no one silver bullet. I think you have to do a number of things, right? And I think you're specifically talking about how do you kind of, attract and also retain people, right? Especially in the sales function. Okay. I think one of the couple of things that we have done, okay, first of all, I think getting role models and getting people, injecting people at senior levels, very important, right? Because I think you need people to inspire you. So for example, our biggest unit, okay, which is the North unit, is actually headed by a female. Right now, that one move actually inspired so many people because you're like, okay, I can get there as well, And interestingly, I had so many customer executives, frontliners, who actually came and said, you know what, Pam, okay, that's the terminology that they use, that the fact that we see a female leader there actually has inspired our daughters as well, So every time there's a virtual town hall that happens, we make sure that our daughters are listening. So, that one role model, and I keep telling this to women, that you don't know who you're inspiring, right? So don't give it up, because you're inspiring so many people. So getting role models and injecting them at different pipeline levels is very important, okay, starting from the top. So I think that's an important piece. Secondly, constantly focusing on different feeder pipelines. So, getting them at the entry level, getting them at the mid level, having a structured program and giving them a path, right, is very important. That's really helped us. Thirdly, mentoring. Okay. And again, it goes back to role models, but having your senior folks, mentor and, having those platforms, because when women get these platforms, they realize that, look, I think situations or issues are very similar, right? Can I learn from what the other person has gone through? And I can tell you, when we did this, when we created these platforms and we actually had every single senior leader, women leader, take at least 10 women under her wings, right, to mentor, we actually averted 5 resignations. And these were simple reasons, somebody just needed to talk and guide the right way, right? And those 5 people did not resign. You know what they did? They just took a sabbatical for 3 months, 6 months, came back, right? So that's the power of creating those platforms, right? And having role models, having that mentoring. So I think that, is very important. And of course, the other things continue, which is really gender agnostic, but, giving women platforms to talk, to reach out, having those role models. I think those are some of the key things that we have focused on, and it has worked.
Very impressive. I think I really like the example of the one-on-one mentoring or the many-on-one mentoring that you spoke about. Ruchita, I'd like to come in here and get a bit personal with your career trajectory, connected to this question. How have you managed your career? Have there been inflection points where you were like, you know what, I'm going to go out of the race now, or I'm going to take it slow? Or what do you believe has been the biggest contributor to where you are now?
Okay, so partially once in my career, yes. I think the first time I had to come back from my maternity leave. Just for the audience, I have 2 children. My elder one is a teenager, 16 and a half. My younger one is 10. So the first time, I kind of dabbled with it or flirted with it, if I can call it. But honestly, I think I flirted with it because that was the chatter around. That is what, as women, we hear of women, that these are the choices and trade-offs that you have to do. I don't think my heart was in it. So which is why thankfully I didn't do it. I think the piece that kind of helped me move away was, I think, just as Pavitra said, I think it's important to see women around and it's important to see others who are doing it. But I think for me, what really was that I asked myself that question that, why is it that I'm contemplating this? And, the answer that I came back with, and I say this to women all the time, that, if a woman can't continue a career in India, it's very hard to do that in markets that are like Europe or US, because here we have 2 sets of parents, friends, relatives, neighbors, domestic help, all of that support, right? I mean, India is totally blessed, to have all of this. So frankly, I somewhere feel, so for me, the yardstick was that I can't take it that easy. There is enough and more support. I just have to ask. And I have to ask. People will be more than willing to help, but I have to get comfortable emotionally with getting that support and being okay with it, right? So I think for me, it was that discovery for myself, which kind of just ended that flirtatious thought as well. For me, what I've done, one more thing that I've done is actually when my younger one was born, she was, I think, about 1.5, 2, when I actually raised my hands and I went and took a role in Singapore, whereas my family continued to be based in India. And I've done the weekly flybacks, the life of a consultant. So Friday night, I would come back from Singapore, spend time with my family on the weekend. Sunday night, take a red-eye flight into Singapore and be in office on Monday. And I thought that was a phase where I really grew emotionally and strategically, because, then the time that I was at work, that had to really count for the sacrifice and the cost that I was paying for, right? In that sense. And I think, so I just really grew as an individual, as a professional in that experience. I think the other thing that also helped that phase is, I think, my family, including my husband, stepped up a lot more. And, Raj alluded to it, that women often tend to have a heavier load of the responsibilities. I think this phase just allowed everyone else to step up more. And I think that has been beneficial for my children. They've connected a lot more with grandparents, with my husband, etc. So their bonding has become stronger. And my kids have become more independent, so there have been these positives that have come out of it for them as well. So it kind of allowed me to make that call. Wasn't easy, but it was worth the thing. So I've done some of those pivots. I've also done very unusual career pivots and role pivots, kind of going back to what we've been telling the audience, that a career in sales can actually help you accelerate or get roles that are business roles. So I did this sales stint for about 14 years, and then I came back into a COO role straight away. I did that, and then I went into a head of M&A role, and then right now I'm doing something very different in digital marketing. So I have an 18 years career in financial services, which now I've rebuilt into a 3-year career with the tech and digital marketing space, right? So I think it was really my foundational sales experience in the first 14 years that really groomed me to take on these business roles subsequently, and it's been very, very invaluable. So I would say that, and the only thing that kept me earlier from doing it was because I wasn't thinking big enough for myself. As you rightly said, the dare to dream. I think it was just really my own mindset that was holding me back. So I found that to be a very powerful shift in mindset that has, really helped me.
Interesting. Very, very pertinent points. Thanks for sharing actually the personal example that you talked about. I'll actually open this question to the panel. One of the questions that we've received is, especially because a lot of the examples that you've mentioned have also been initiatives led in your companies. In your organization, what policy change received the most positive feedback from the women sales force? So can you keep this short as a response, but a specific initiative or policy that you believe received the most unanimous feedback?
I can go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I think one of the recent policy changes that we did was, women coming back from maternity, and especially in sales, right? We've allowed them to travel with their child and a help. Right now, that has really made a huge difference, because then you're not missing out on anything, and you're out there, but you've got that ecosystem and infrastructure with you, moving with you. So yeah.
Perfect. It's almost like the caregiver travel policy as you're traveling. Perfect. Yes. Anyone else? Okay. So what I'm going to, Abhay, please.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it's a policy shift, because I think LinkedIn as a company has always been very oriented towards our employees. So during COVID, I think just the fact that we were very compassionate about letting people work at different times, be very flexible. We were absolutely sure that we will not lose somebody just because they have to manage things at home and have different times at work. So we were very, very conscious of the fact that we will allow flexibility. Obviously, nearly everyone, I think, has had policies around work at any point in time that you feel like it's left to you as an individual to decide whether you want to come back to office, work remotely, or work in a hybrid environment. So I think that was the biggest policy change that happened, which I'm assuming is kind of a norm now in most of the organizations.
Understand. So the much needed flexibility. I can see Purba. Purba, I just need one question that I want to wrap up the panel with. And this I would request all of you to come in. If you had to give your most straight talk advice to women either in sales or exploring sales, what would that advice look like? Most realistic, authentic advice that you would give. I want to start with you, Rishi, and then move around the panel.
So perhaps the advice would be that that keep at it. I mean, it don't get dissuaded by what you think is tough. So just keep at it. It might be challenging, but like down the years you'll realize that it was absolutely a must to do.
Perfect. So keep at it, must to do. Abhay?
I think it's going to be about asking a seat at the table and being assertive, and followed by making sure that if you're in sales or in any other function, whether it's sales or not, make sure that you're doing your job well, you understand your job, because expectations is something which is absolutely critical to understand. If you understand what is expected to of your job, irrespective of whichever function, you will do good. So understanding of what your job entails is going to be the most critical piece of advice that I would give.
To basically know your stuff, know what you're talking about. Thanks, Abhay. Pavitra.
Yeah, I think just one thing, don't underpeg or underestimate yourself, because there's nothing that a female can't do. So just go for it.
True girl power. Thanks, Pavitra, for that rallying cry. Ruchita, I'd love to wrap up the panel with you.
Yeah, I'd actually say that sales will enrich you, not just professionally, but I think even outside of work. So there's a lot of there's a lot to gain from a sales experience. So I would say go for it.
Super. Thank you so much. I think we've had a very, very authentic, real conversation like what we had set out in the beginning, and just great to hear your stories and the kind of experiences that you brought for the people. I hope they found it useful too.